Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. Finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and guys, it definitely matters. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Alright guys, I don't know what's going on. The last couple of days I've been lacking energy and not feeling good at all. I'm going to try to record tomorrow's upload as best I can. I can barely keep my eyes open. My head hurts so bad. I'm trying to figure out. I got bit the other day when I was up north. I had when I came back out of the woods, I had 6 ticks on me, and I didn't catch one until a day later, and it was burrowed in. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but I'm gonna try to get tonight's or tomorrow's upload up or done, that way you guys have an upload for tomorrow. I'm gonna go to my primary and find out what is going on, because I have no strength, no energy, nothing, and short of breath. But let's get into the second half. All right, today's first part of the upload. This experience happened to my cousin who was visiting our grandmother on Navajo Nation reservation. He was what you would call an urban Navajo, born and raised in Phoenix and rarely visiting the res. He was raised in the church and was aware of certain Navajo taboo and folklore, but didn't heed any or abide by any. Him and his older brother used to stay at our grandmother's during the summer to help out with chores and livestock. They called it sheep camp. However, sheep camp was a summer lodge or cabin in the mountains where you took the sheep during the summer months to graze. Being from the city, I guess they just liked the term sheep camp, when in reality it was just our grandmother's permanent residence. Like most rural residents on the res, old automobiles and appliances that no longer worked piled up in the front yard due to lack of transportation or waste management options. There was an obsolete fridge from the 80s on the far side of my grandmother's porch and a broken down muscle car from decades earlier. The car was more of a skeleton, a forgotten remnant, that rested about 30 feet far off the left in perfect eye-line sight from the porch. The model of the car I can't remember, but the windows had been all busted out and the upholstery weathered and cracked. The desert sand reclaimed most of it. The tires were shredded and half buried. If you grew up on the res, this served as a derelict jungle gym or playground. My mother and I had decided to visit my grandma one summer afternoon when I was 12 years old, the same age as my cousin. We greeted everyone upon our arrival, and our grandmother fed us. My cousin asked if I wanted to walk to the canyon and told me he had something to tell me with urgency. As soon as we were out of earshot of any of the adults or his older brother, he told me that something had happened earlier that day, at around 5:30 in the morning. Although it was summer, in the Arizona temperate desert, it's easily many degrees colder at night and early mornings. He told me he was awoken by the urge to relieve himself. The sky was dark blue before dawn. He was half asleep, and it was too cold to run all the way out to the outhouse, no inside plumbing. So he continued to say he darted to the left to pee behind the old fridge off the porch, his eyes half closed and his mind still a bit hazy from just waking up. Then he hears the distinct sounds of something jagged and sharp scratching in long successions on the metal, accompanied with a heightened whimper of a sheepdog. His eyes open wide and he tries to scan the horizon to locate the origins of the hurt sheepdog. Initially, he thought he saw the dog trapped in the car, but there were no windows or glass obstructing the dog's escape from the wreckage. He witnessed the dog clawing and scratching to fight its way out of the window frame of the door side. Its front paws, or claw, at the outer shell of the driver's door, making the sound of the nails on the chalkboard. He finished urinating and, dazed, took one step off the porch to help the dog out of the car. Suddenly he freezes in his tracks as the cold, wicked laugh rips through the early dawn air. His eyes immediately fixate on where this laugh originated from, inside of the car. He rubs his eyes, focuses his gaze on the dog, and his eyes follow along the dog's torso. And then he sees that something has its arms and claws wrapped around the waist of the dog, preventing it from escaping. At this point, the sun had inched and crept over the mesa and turned the sky from pale blue to pale yellow. The pale yellow light reveals that the driver's side door of the car is completely covered in smeared blood. He jolts back inside, bolts the door behind him. He doesn't tell anyone because he is paralyzed with fear that if he talked about it, nothing would stop it from busting in the door and killing him, his brother, and our grandmother. I inquired about what it looked like or if he even saw what had been holding the dog against its will. He said it looked like a werewolf, but a sickly werewolf with mange. He noted that it was hairy, but you could see almost dry, cracked gray skin underneath. He said before he ran, he slouched down to see what was holding the dog inside of the car, and, whatever it was, grinned. Its wicked smile was filled with sharp, jagged teeth beaming from side to side. In all honesty, I thought he was lying to me and trying to scare me, thinking I was some dumb, uncivilized reser who would believe a werewolf tale. We spent some time in the canyon playing on boulders and throwing rocks into a stream. I had all but forgotten what he shared with me until we made it back to my grandmother's house. That's when he asked if I wanted to see the scene of the crime. I was skeptical at the time, until we walked up to the car in question. I couldn't believe it. There were tufts of bloody multicolored dog fur caught in the window frame and a bloody paw print smeared on the outside of the driver's side door. There were long scratch marks from the dog everywhere, not sharp enough to cut through the metal, but enough to make slight indentations, as if the nails were scratching down with so much pressure that the protein from the nails, or whatever nails are made of, buckled and gave way, filed down on the metal. I stood there in amazement and fear. All we did was throw dirt on the bloody markings, and I haven't spoken of it until just now. Side note, the sheepdog was not murdered. We spent all late afternoon looking for her. The dog was a female. We later found her under an abandoned manufactured home on the property. She was afraid to come out for a couple of weeks, so my cousin said he always brought her food and water for the remainder of the summer break. Today's second part of the upload. I live in the woodland part of the Upper Panhandle near Pittsburgh. While some of the town is buildings and restaurants, when you leave that town, it gets pretty scary. We have what I think is a nature preserve called Tomlinson Run. They have hiking trails, camping trails. To set the scene, it's a muggy summer day around mid-June with heavy rain. I was out with my friends going on a camping trip in the woods. We were going to go into the woods, but it was easier just to get a small cabin. They provide you with a fire pit around the back near the tree line. We're sitting at the fire having a few beers when it starts to pour. The heavy brush of trees over top of us hid us from the rain for the most part, so we stayed out near the fire. Once it started to fall off the leaves, we decided to call it a night. While packing up, being pretty tipsy, my friend, we'll call him Alex, had to take a piss. The only bathrooms in the park are near the building about a mile away, so it's common just to do your business by the shack. Keeping the fire dimly lit while we were packing proved to be a harder task. All of a sudden, while peeing, he turned around and started yelling to go inside. Him, not being one to joke around and having a serious tone, persuaded us to move our asses. We grabbed all of our chairs and firewood and hauled it into the cabin. He came in 10 seconds after us and locked the door. He explained that he saw a wolf along the tree line off to our right, stalking us, maybe looking for an easy snack. Now, to make sure you get the layout of the cabins, I'll explain. Each cabin has 4 beds and 1 platform on the roof that someone could sleep in. The 2 beds are bunkers, and each had a window above the first bed and below the second. There was also a window on the top bed. The cabin was designed like an old Indian cabin with a round room and squared off walls, being a cheap $50 a night. There was no lights or power outlets in some cabins. This was the case for our cabin. We expected this, having been there several times, so we brought flashlights and portable chargers. Once we get inside, we're all kind of just laying there planning out our next day. Since there were 4 of us, I decided to sleep on the second floor bed. I took the ladder up, then pulled it to form a railing. We all dozed off after it had been a long day. About halfway through the night, it's to be about 2 in the morning, I woke up to my friend, James, sprinting back into the cabin, screaming. Apparently, he went outside to pee and thought he heard a wolf howl, but in a deep tone. Now, this is strange, as we've never seen this many wolves around, and they usually have a high-pitch howl. He then went on to say that when he turned to look where he heard the noise, he saw something standing on 2 feet with claw-like hands looking back at him. This freaked us all out, and we decided not to go outside until morning. We all got back to our beds. I turned over and tried to sleep. I had a very uneasy feeling in my stomach and felt as if someone was watching me. I rolled over and looked out the window, and that's when I saw it. It was crouched down, facing away from me, but its head was turned, staring at me. As soon as it realized I was looking at it, it stood up and sprinted away. Not like any sprint or person I'd ever seen. It was about 8 feet tall and ran like an Olympian. I tried to brush it off as a hallucination, but I knew what I had just seen was real. The next day, we all agreed to leave, and I told my friends in the car what I had seen. Alex then said that's what he saw when he was peeing, but didn't want to freak us out, so we stayed quiet. I wasn't sure what it was at the time until I researched more. To this day, I have not been back to go to the campsite or into the woods. Sometimes when I'm walking at night around my neighborhood, I can feel eyes on me, and I know exactly what is watching me. Today's third encounter. Around the time of the early 90s, I lived in New Mexico. I was a gang youth counselor at the time and worked with a number of houses where they classed as either residential treatment centers or drug and alcohol homes. What this really meant was that if you were in a residential treatment center, the clients in there were typically prone to more violence and behavioral issues. If you were a client at a drug and alcohol house, this often meant that you were high-risk youth who came from a sketchy family background. I worked in one of the drug and alcohol homes. My shift was 3.5 days long, and that meant I had 3.5 days off to go camping and other such things in New Mexico. I had a kid who was Navajo who was brought up in Big Res in Four Corners one night. He had been found wandering around in some really far-flung area on the res, and no one from any part of the tribe would claim him to raise. So they brought him to us. He was a big guy, and he had never spoke. Part of our cultural training with Navajo was to not make eye contact unless they initiated it. He kept his head down and remained silent. A few days went by, and since I lived in the house 3.5 days a week, and then had 3.5 days off, I had planned to go fly fishing in the Four Corners area on the San Juan River. It's a beautiful river. My last night in the house, the night counselor woke me up at around 2 in the morning, knocking at my door and whispering, "You've got to come downstairs. The new kid is doing something weird." I go down, he's sitting in the middle of the living room chanting, and he's got this huge motherfucking knife. There's some other assorted items around, I really don't remember what. This was 93, but feathers were involved in some other things. And while he knows we are there, he simply continues this ritual. Now, I'm all for freedom of ritual, but knives are not allowed, or any sharps. And he was supposed to be in bed. Long story short, I call the police and the house therapist, and the police come and we have him removed. On his way out the door, he locks eyes with me and shouts something long and very much in Navajo, which no one understands. The next day, I go camping alone in the Four Corners campground near San Juan River. Drive out there, spooky. Low-lying ground fog from which these wild Navajo sheep, churro, emerge suddenly right in the middle of the road. The Navajo really don't pen their livestock so much. Anyway, it's spooky, but I push it aside, get to the campsite. Campsite was this place called Cottonwood Campground. Every 50 to 100 feet was a campsite. And it being summer, all the spots were taken. I had reserved mine, so I pull in, laid out my tarp, got my sleeping bag set. I was too poor for a tent. Plus, I had been raised by my father, who used to tell me that tents were for Democrats and liberals. I'm a liberal, by the way. I got a nice fire going, and while the flames cracked away, I tied some flies and listened to the coyotes howl in the distance. On both sides of me, there was a truck and a camper. Both had plates from Texas. The truck had a tent, and the others were staying in their camper. I fell asleep near the fire and went into a dream. Well, eventually the dream turned into a very terrifying nightmare where some wild animal was attacking me. There was a primal sense to the dream I was unused to, and all I could hear was growling, snarling, and the detail was very real. I could even feel the hot breath near my cheek as something lunged toward me. Woke up, the sounds continued right next to me. I freaked out. What the fuck? Some animal kept circling me in the darkness. I had brought a huge hunting knife and kept it next to my sleeping bag. Also, I was sleeping near my car, which I realized was a very good thing. I also had a flashlight. Unfortunately, I'd forgotten to change the batteries in the flashlight, so when I turned it on and aimed it, it only dimly stayed on for 30 seconds. And in that 30, I saw a large, actually huge, coyote snarling at me. When the flashlight went out, I threw it at this thing. And when it charged me again, I decided to burrow into my sleeping bag with the knife pointing straight up. I would kill it if it attacked me by coming on top of the sleeping bag. I'll thrust the knife straight up into this creature's heart. Meanwhile, I'm screaming for help, screaming that I'm being attacked by something and I need a light or a gun or any kind of help. I'm being specific so people know I'm A, not crazy, B, not a criminal. I'm telling them that I need a light or someone to come out and help me. As I'm being attacked, no one comes to my aid. It's as if the entire campground doesn't hear me or is ignoring me. My neighbors are only 50 feet away. Nothing. This goes on for a half an hour. I'm scared shitless at this point. Finally, I got the damn thing to back up enough by throwing many rocks at it. Once it backs up for a minute, I decide the risk of getting attacked, grab my keys, my knife, and my pants and run to the car door, heart in my mouth the whole way. Somehow, I get into the car without getting bitten. I turn on my headlights and this gray shape slinks off into some brush about 30 feet away. Its eyes red and glowing at me through the shrub. I lie down in the hatchback trying to calm myself down, but it's hard to do. Just when I'm catching my breath after 15 minutes, there's this sudden thump on the side of the car. I swear to fucking God, it's snarling in the window. Its salivating jaws are at my window and snapping in the air while looking straight at me, ferociously lunging to get into the car. Screw it, I fly out of there, leave my shit behind. I spend the night at a well-lit parking lot. When I went back to get my stuff the next day, the people camped on either side of me didn't make eye contact or speak to me. It's like they were unaware of anything that had happened, or they were scared of me or something. Meanwhile, I'm pissed. When I got back to ABQ, some friends of mine who used to play pool with, twins who are Navajo, half jokingly suggested the kid had been some sort of black magic sorcerer or some shit and had cursed me successfully. While I'm a firm skeptic, it sure felt like it. And yes, I called the ranger station for the campground and told them about the attack. And they said they never heard of a coyote attacking a human out there and how skeptical they were of my story, especially since no one else had reported anything. But they would follow up if they found the animal. Shocker, I never heard from them again. Little shorter than normal, I apologize. But that was tonight's second half. I want to thank everybody for all your support. And may the Great Spirit be with us all. And may He guide us down that path that we call life. Stay safe, everyone.